This video is about Colin Ross, otherwise known as Big Bear, and I'm going to be talking about the Big Bear movement and the affiliations that he has. Colin Ross, otherwise known as Big Bear, he played football and went semi-pro, and he grew up in Taber, Alberta, and was one of the only genus families in town. Meaning he's related to somebody important, in this case Louis Royale, who I'll be speaking about very briefly in this video. And he as well had a work visa where he went to New York, and he supposedly injured his knee there, and he had started running a nightclub. When he was in New York, he met a Colombian drug dealer and started working for him, but eventually fled. He also traveled Europe for many years and had many places to stay or residences, wasn't exactly specific, but he did some time in Norway and had a decent amount of cocaine. I'm not sure of the amount. And he also mentioned supporting the trucker convoy as well. And speaking of cons here, for some of the many things he sells, including in his clothing line, he literally sells masks. Kind of funny for a guy who claims to be speaking out against the agenda. Something here to contradict exactly what I just showed you. The Big Bear movement is a network of people who provide holistic healing and healthy lifestyle choices with our platform of products and services, like masks. Our goal is to enrich people's lives by guiding them to techniques and practices that achieve a healthy state of consciousness or self-awareness and a well-balanced life. Well, you're definitely altering people's consciousness, and we can even talk about some of the esoteric symbols too, like he has a Metatron clothing line, which I'm going to get to, but first, every child matters. Now, I'm not going to talk about this phrase in particular. I think that that's an issue worth addressing, perhaps in the distant future. However, I just want to say that it's interesting that the shirts are orange, because orange is a color that is said to stimulate productivity and creativity according to color theory. And that has impacts on our subconscious. Now, orange in one of the ciphers of gematria equals 33, which also masonry does, and thematically Masons like to refer to themselves as builders, so I think that that idea is a little bit interesting. Now, the Metatron clothing line. Anybody who has seen many of my previous videos knows that I have mentioned the cube, square, color black, number 4, or the planet Saturn, or God Saturn, and what that actually represents, which is known as the demiurge. I still haven't made a video speaking about the demiurge because that's a very large concept in and of itself. But as for the depiction of what they call Metatron's cube, he adds the BB right in the center, Big Bear, or 22, which is also a building number for Freemasons. So we have Metatron's cube. In Judaic religion, there's a cube called Metatron's cube, and Metatron is an angel in this religion. Now, in the Islamic religion, he's known as Metatron, which is the angel of the veil, and in folklore, highest of the angels, and serves as the scribe. In the Jewish Apocrypha and early Kabbalah, Metatron is the name that Enoch received after his transformation into an angel. So, interestingly enough here, we can't really go into subjects of the Kabbalah, and defining Kabbalah as Jewish mysticism is rather overly simplistic when there are so many different forms and interpretations and meanings to that word. However, in this case, I'm going to simplify it and just say that this represents Jewish mysticism here. Now, I'm going to move a little bit forward here. It's interesting to see more esoteric symbolism here. We have the infinity symbol, and sometimes, well, for one thing, I just want to say the infinity symbol as well is put right onto a mask, and I think that that is interesting because sometimes you see a snake eating its own tail, the Ouroboros, which is a symbol that represents life, fertility, and the cycle of death and rebirth. Interestingly enough, because you are quite literally killing yourself. Infinity symbolizes the concepts of eternity, balance, and eternal life. You say so. So here are some of the causes that he supports. A portion of all proceeds will be donated to the following causes. So, every child matters, go figure. The IRSSS, the Indian Residential School Survivor Society, is a provincial organization with a 20-year history of providing services to Indian residential school survivors. It started in 1994 as a working committee of the First Nations Summit, and they were known as the Residential School Project, housed out of and as a part of the BC First Nations Summit. The work has primarily been to assist survivors with the litigation processes pertaining to residential school abuses, and in more recent years the work has expanded to include assisting the descendants of survivors and implementing community education measures, Indigenous and non-Indigenous. You say so. So, interestingly enough, that blurb is essentially copy and pasted from this website, and which is the IRSSS website, and the site was designed by Anamiki, which is a native word. I apologize if I've mispronounced it. I believe it means something like Thunderbird. So, Anamiki, our impact focuses on creating equitable outcomes for Indigenous peoples, and our tool of choice is technology. We achieve this impact every day through our work in supporting this Indigenous innovation and reconciliation movements with our skills and resources. By being an example of an Indigenous-focused tech company, we hope to inspire the next generation of Indigenous youth to choose technology and entrepreneurship as a career path. We believe that investing in technology is the path forward for economic justice, self-sufficiency, and equitable outcomes for Indigenous peoples, and advocate that economic development initiatives transition away from resource extraction to knowledge-based economies. Now, that is social economy type of language, social economy being a synonym for the 2030 agenda. And now, when speaking about knowledge in terms of the 2030 agenda, it refers to the public dissemination, commercialization, and management of intellectual property. So they want more interconnectivity, essentially, and Anamiki is what designed the website for the IRSSS. Now, Anamiki partners with the First Nations Technology Council, and the First Nations Technology Council's mandate is to ensure that all 203 First Nations communities in BC have access to the internet and the capacity to utilize digital technologies to the fullest potential. This team works tirelessly towards its mandate by hosting or introducing technical training programs, creating opportunities for Indigenous people in BC to learn about technology, and providing resources for everyone. This is called Songhees Innovation Center. You'll understand why I'm talking about this momentarily, but first I'm going to read this to you. The Innovation Center is welcome to Indigenous innovators from any nation and from any line of work, including private enterprise, nonprofit, and even government. The purpose of the Innovation Center is to foster collaboration between Indigenous innovators to develop, refine, and launch solutions to issues facing our businesses and our communities today. So, Songhees Innovation Center, some of their partners, like the Indigenomics Institute. That just sounds creepy. I have no idea what the hell that is. But we can see Anamiki over here. Next up is Amnesty International. Now, the reason why I'm bringing up Amnesty International is because no more stolen sisters. Amnesty International is a leading organization for the cause of human rights and the campaign called No More Stolen Sisters. Violence against women, and certainly violence against Indigenous women, is rarely understood as a human rights issue. To the extent that governments, media, and the general public do consider concerns about violence against women, it is more frequent for it to be described as a criminal concern or a social issue. It is both of those things, of course, but it is also very much a human rights issue. Yes, so Amnesty International. This is where that blurb I just read is copy and pasted from. Since 1964, Amnesty has had special consultative status at the United Nations, which has allowed them to shape crucial developments in human rights. So, essentially, they have a partnership with the United Nations. So far, what we have with Colin Ross, or Big Bear, is the causes he funds and support have affiliations with the United Nations. Let's see if We Make Impact does, especially with a symbol like that. Okay? It says a portion of the proceeds from the sales of these shirts will go towards We Make Impact and their clean water projects in Africa. Now I'm going to use the word clean specifically in air quotes for the simple fact that this organization is actually on board with the sustainable agenda, and we can actually see that through their website. Once we build clean water for the village, our team of volunteers begins to implement up to 12 projects that support the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We Make Impact is also mentioned by the Rotary Club. So not only do we have Colin Ross essentially bringing in a cash flow for the United Nations in a very indirect fashion, we see this organization, We Make Impact, is actually sponsored by the Rotary Club. And fact of the matter is, what we have to be aware of when we enter every municipality throughout at least Ontario, what I can always see on every sign is some sort of fraternity, whether that be something for a Masonic Lodge, a Knights of Columbus Hall, a Rotary Club like here, or a Lions Club, and as well Orange Halls, which I'll be talking about the Orange Order a little bit in this video. There are more upper echelon groups that you won't necessarily see signs for everywhere, but essentially infiltrate, deceive, and destroy. That would be the Knights of Malta and the Jesuits, otherwise known as the Society of Jesus. I've definitely called them out many times. So now I'm going to focus a little bit on the portion of history that revolves around Louis Royale. I'm not going to be talking so much about historical events, but I am going to be talking about the fraternities that surround the characters that surround Louis Royale and Louis Royale himself, and as well some of the parties and orders involved. So I'm going to draw your attention to 1, 2, 3, and 7 at the center of events on the Red River in the vicinity of Winnipeg in 1869 to 1870 were two groups of people of mixed blood, one primarily Catholic, French-Canadian, Sioux, and Ojibwe, speaking French and Michif, French-English Ojibwe Cree, and the other primarily Anglican and Cree, speaking English and Michif. A group of recent immigrants from Ottawa and Northern Ireland and Scotland, Orangemen and Presbyterians, so that's where the Orange Order comes into play, and a small group of Irish Catholic Fenians, refugees from the Grand Army of the Republic and the American Civil War seeking to confront the British government in its northern colonies. And then we also have spies, agents, and provocateurs representing Napoleon III, the newly recognized state of Minnesota, the government of the United States, the ultramontane Bishop of Quebec, and possibly the papacy, the British Crown, and the newly organized Canadian national government. So I'll be talking more or less about the British Crown, the Canadian national government, Hudson's Bay Company, and a little bit about Manitoba, considering Louis Royale is credited as finding Manitoba, which translates to Land of the Great Spirit. So one of the characters that surrounded Louis Royale was Sir John A. Macdonald, the so-called founder of the country. It was also the Grand Master's privilege to welcome Sir John A. Macdonald, Prime Minister of Canada and the Grand Representative of the Grand Lodge of England. So basically what I'm saying here is that Sir John A. Macdonald was a Freemason. So that's one fraternal tie right there to somebody who was supposedly opposing Louis Royale. But anybody who truly understands history knows that both sides of a narrative are always controlled, and that there is always a hidden hand that essentially controls the narrative. And the agenda of the order is Ordo ab Chao, order out of chaos. While things might not seem to make sense to us, however, it makes sense to them, and they achieve their goals through means of chaos, which bring about some sort of twisted order. Three members have been Prime Ministers of Canada: Sir John A. Macdonald, the father of Confederation, Sir Mackenzie Bowell, a past Grand Master, and John Diefenbaker. These are all members of the Orange Order. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about the Orange Order. I'm not going to talk too much about their history because I'm really unsure about the accuracy of this website, if I'm honest with you. But the whole point that I'm getting at about all of those fraternities that I mentioned, Knights of Columbus, Orange Order, etc., Rotary Club, all of that, is that there's always Freemasonic founders, because Freemasonry is one of the oldest fraternities, if not the oldest. I am not too sure on that, but I could tell you that they predate any of the fraternities besides Freemasons themselves that I have mentioned. So In the wake of the Battle of Diamond, which in reality was a 15-minute skirmish, these three characters, Wilson, Winter, and Sloane, resort to form another society of men, this one exclusively for Protestants, who would be prepared to defend Protestant families from attack and persecution by the Roman Catholic defenders. This new organization was called the Orange Society in fond memory of the Protestant king, William of Orange, and because the men who created it were well-informed and active Freemasons. The organization was formed into lodges on the Masonic model with a neo-Masonic degree system which included modes of recognition, pass grips, and words, what every fraternity has. And essentially, even though this appears to be a Protestant order that opposes Catholicism, it's very much like the Ku Klux Klan, where it's supposedly an organization that is known as a white supremacist organization. These are surface level pieces of information, and essentially the KKK in and of itself was actually formed by a Confederate general by the name of Sir Albert Pike, and he was also a Freemason. So essentially what I'm getting at is that all of these fraternal orders seem to have some sort of surface level objective, but as you go through the ranks, you tend to notice that it is essentially an order of the blind leading the blind. And even though some things may appear to oppose one another, that's only for the Ordo Ab Chao agenda to unfold, as I was saying. Now, in 1883, Father Joseph Damiani, excuse me for the pronunciation, offered Métis leader Louis Royal a teaching position at St. Peter's Mission. St. Peter's Mission School is a Jesuit-ran school. Now, I don't know if Louis Royal was officially a Jesuit or not, but he was essentially housed by them, and he was a Catholic. And a large portion about him that is really underplayed is the fact that a lot of the Irish Orange Order really hated his guts. And, like I was saying, John A. Macdonald was a member of the Orange Order. So now I'm going to be talking just very briefly about Hudson's Bay Company. Granted by King Charles II of England on May 2nd, 1670, the Royal Charter gave an exclusive trading monopoly over the entire Hudson Bay drainage basin to the Governor and Company of Adventurers of England Trading into Hudson Bay Company. This clauses outline the rights and obligations of the Company of Adventurers over their new domain, including the rights to exploit mineral resources and the obligation to search for the Northwest Passage. Now, once Hudson's Bay Company received their royal charter, they began trading throughout Rupert's Land. Now, I'm going to give a little map here to show you what I mean. So Rupert's Land was Hudson's Bay Company territory, and then there's Upper Canada and Lower Canada. And essentially here, what we can see is that, so Louis Royal at surface value is known for opposing the Hudson's Bay Company and finding the province of Manitoba. And we can see that Lower and Upper Canada mostly consist of parts of Quebec and Ontario, as well as some of the Northeast. However, he is credited as founding Manitoba, otherwise known as Land of the Great Spirits. And we see here he has the honorary title of First Premier of Manitoba. And the reason why I'm getting at all of this here, we see him with blue and red representing duality, is the simple fact that he opposed the Hudson's Bay Company, which is employed by the British Crown, and Canada essentially is a puppet nation of the British Crown. So what he did was transfer ownership from the Crown to the Crown. He did absolutely nothing other than essentially, at very best, be a pawn in history, I'm sorry to say. But he is definitely idolized in history, and I really don't think he should be. So, also, the reason why I'm showing you a picture of Roman Baber here is he's part of something called the Knights of Rizal. I know that there's some kind of Filipino fraternal order that I've not really dived into the history of, but the reason why I'm bringing up Roman Baber is because he was supported by Colin Ross at the time when Roman Baber was looking to be leader of the Conservatives, which now is ran by the thug Pierre Poilievre, which I can also do an entire video on. So, yeah, we see Roman Baber being inducted into this order. Anyway, this is all I wanted to share to you about Colin Ross, and also, too, I just want to share some final thoughts here, is that in regards to Manitoba, I was perhaps mistaken in my previous video, or perhaps locations were changed where Marcus Ray and others had supposedly attended Manitoba instead, and I'm just very thankful that nobody was hurt and nothing happened of the sort that I had showed in the recording, and I was not trying to stir the pot or bring about fear porn. I just want to bring about findings and discoveries, and we have to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, essentially. And this is all I'm trying to do. So anyway, thanks for watching, and take care of yourselves.